everyone. We will be starting the webinar in about a minute, just to welcome you all. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are joining us from or connecting from, and welcome to today's deep dive discussion on some of the key questions raised in our recent learning series 3, which we titled Making Noise in the Margins. How do we engineer change from the edge of the education landscape? As you know, part of our learning series focus is to listen to and reflect on the conversations with our peers, partners, and also local actors. My name is Caleb Opuni, and I am Country Director for IDP Foundation here in Ghana. I'm connecting with you all from Accra, Ghana. And for this session, I'll be moderating or serving as the moderator of the conversation. I promise this is not going to be a monologue. I'm being joined by a distinguished panel of experts in this space who are going to join me, and we're going to have a very fruitful and hopefully interesting this conversation. Of course, with you also participating as our audience. At this moment, I will turn over to this distinguished panel of experts who are joining me today for this conversation, for them to introduce themselves and let us know which organizations you're working from, and just a little bit about who they are. So yeah, let's start.
Thank you, Stephen. I'll go first. My name is Kavita Rajagopalan, and I'm a director at the Global Schools Forum. I'm calling in today from Chennai in India. Global Schools Forum is a community of non-state education organizations working across Africa, Latin America, and South and Southeast Asia. Our community is currently about 93 organizations, and GSF at its core is this really vibrant community. We're an innovation accelerator, and we're a policy and partnership builder for the sector. I'm quite delighted to be here, and I look forward to chatting with you more.
Thank you, Kavita.
All right, I'll go next. Hi, everyone. My name is Olanrewaju Oniyitan, and I'm the Executive Director for Seed Care and Support Foundation in Lagos, Nigeria. However, I'm speaking today from Cambridge in the United Kingdom. Seed is a nonprofit organization that was recently registered, but was working as a project in Lagos, Nigeria, working with over 700 non-state schools, supporting them to improve their quality. We also work in the policy space, advocating for the non-state sector with government. And we've recently started another program working to improve the pipeline of quality teachers for the education sector. I'm glad to be here today. I'll pass it on to Moses.
Moses, please introduce yourself.
Thank you. My name is Moses Wokono. I'm joining you from Nairobi, Kenya, and I am the national chair of the Unified APBET School Association of Kenya, an umbrella for the low-fee private schools. And I'm also the proprietor of the Excellent Schools in Kenya, and I'm happy to join this conversation to bring my insights in the education space, and especially schools which are domiciled in the slums of Kenya. Thank you.
Thank you, Moses, Lanre, and Kavita. And I'm happy to be your moderator and also joining this conversation. For the style or the format of this conversation, this is a fireside chat, so it's quite informal. And even though our panelist is going to lead a lot of the conversations, I would request that they keep their responses and answers quite brief so that we can have more engagement also from the audiences as well. I will invite the audiences to share questions if they have any in the chat box live with us. Please feel free to also tag any of the panelists that you want to direct your questions to, and we will do our best to get a lot of the questions answered, getting to the close of the session. Just to also, an FYI, and in all transparency, this session is being recorded, and I'm hoping that everyone joining us is comfortable with this. At this juncture, I would spend a minute or two just to introduce briefly IDP Foundation and to talk a little bit about work before we delve into the issues up for conversation. IDP Foundation is a private family foundation. We are a funder, a supporter, and a champion of the affordable non-state education sector, and specifically low-fee private schools, low-cost private schools, or informal schools, as the context in Kenya is. Our work sits in two main buckets. The first bucket talks about schools. And over with our schools, we have two streams of work. The first is access, where we fund partners who support low-fee private schools with affordable access to credit, loans, to be able to expand their infrastructure, to increase more rooms, to receive more children and learners. The other stream of our work is also quality, and it begs the question, how can we fund partners who serve these schools to improve on their learning outcomes? And so our schools work, which is looking at expansion access, as well as running schools in a very financially sustainable manner and improving learning outcomes, forms the school's bit of our work and answers the question for now. When we look into the future, that's where our systems work, the other bucket of our work, comes in. And that's where we are supporting the affordable non-state sector to gain a strong collective voice, to advocate for itself, to ensure that they are and they become an integral part of this one education system that is complementing public education, and also bringing national systems closer to meeting the education outcomes. And so this is broadly, let's say, a brief, short introduction of IDP's work. Our headquarters is in the US. We operate from two places. We have a team in the UK and a team also in Ghana. Programmatically, in terms of where our schools that we support are, we've been working in Ghana for the past 15 years, and we are in our second year with work in Kenya. We also contribute vibrantly to the global education discourse. So that's a brief on IDP Foundation. Now, to the conversation this afternoon, I'd like to share a little bit of the key points on the issues that has actually brought us by this fireside. And we recently conducted a stakeholder survey, and some of the overviews or the key points that came from this stakeholder survey is informing this particular conversation. And I'd like to share a few of these with you all. In our most recent survey, we spoke to about 89 key stakeholders, 70% of whom are coming from the Global South. And one of the key areas of conversation was about the role of the affordable non-state education sector, particularly low-fee private schools, and how they help to meet national education goals. When I refer to low-fee private schools, some also call it low-cost private schools or informal schools. These are organic, single proprietor, independent-owned schools, serving communities that are usually underserved by public education. They charge fees that are affordable to low-income households, which is often costing only a fraction more than the cost of attending public school. So this is the category of schools that we are referring to. Now, majority of our respondents, about 8% believe that these schools contribute to the SDG goals in every country, and in mostly where our respondents were coming from. And they felt that half of them, majority of them also felt that these schools were not well understood by policymakers. So these schools on one hand are contributing to meeting these SDG goals, yet policymakers don't really understand them. And we know that this will then have an impact on improving outcomes within the sector. So broadly, coming from the responses that we gathered, we realized that 3 strong teams were really kind of synthesized out of this, and we want to focus the conversation today on these strong teams. The first thing is that if we want the affordable non-state sector to be heard, then probably we need greater evidence. We need stronger evidence. The other side of this is that what does localization mean in practical terms? You know, working with partners locally in this particular area, what does that mean in practical terms? It would be great to hear from our panelists what their thinking are. The last bit or strand of the conversation will focus on combating insufficient financing. We could use more financing in the education sector. And so how do we combat this, and what does effective regulation within the sector also look like? So these are the 3 strands of discussion areas that we would focus the conversation around this fireside on. And basically, it goes without saying that the best way to engage education stakeholders, especially policymakers, is to bring forth stronger evidence. Now, I would like to direct my first question to the panel and maybe situate it within this particular context. You know, the UN figures on enrollment, which is usually promoted by a lot of national governments. If you look at the UNESCO Institute of Statistics, if you look at sub-Saharan Africa, it reports that close to 99% of enrollment at the primary level sits. Let me just capture it again. So UNESCO stats reports that school enrollment at primary level sits close to 99% for sub-Saharan Africa. But we know very well that this can only be true when all forms of education provisions are accounted for within these statistics. That means that state schools, non-state schools, which we know the affordable non-state sector is taking care of almost 1/3 in sub-Saharan Africa, should all be accounted for this. Now, my question to the panel is that how is it that the sector which is how can the sector be included in enrollment numbers, 99%, however, be excluded in a lot of education planning, as well as in a lot of government and NGO interventions? So in one sense, we have the sector included in the stats, scoring 99%. However, when we are thinking of intervention, whether it's planning, whether it's NGO, whether it's government interventions, they don't seem to feature. I would like to get the thoughts of Kavita and Olanrewaju on this particular question. Maybe, Kavita, you can start with us.
Yeah, happy to. Thanks, Stephen, for that question. I think there's a couple of things that we need to consider here, especially when we're considering, and there are multiple names for this, the low-cost private school sector, the affordable private school sector. So I'm going to use these terms interchangeably. But I think it's really thinking about what the main source of data is for some of these organizations. It's coming through government EMIS systems. And often in countries where the low-cost private school sector is not regulated and organizations are not registered, they are not accurately capturing enrollments. So I think we need to look at multiple sources of data. And one of the good sources of data for that is household expenditure on education. And in low-income countries, we're seeing that nearly 37% of education financing is coming from household expenditure, right? So parents are paying to send their kids to affordable private schools. And so I think it's really in the government's best interest to think about, one, where they're collecting this data from, and then how are they harnessing the non-state sector. The second is also just, if we look at the government's own role as not just managing government schools, but effectively acting as stewards of the entire education system. And if that is their role, then we can't really ignore non-state actors when it comes to education planning and policy. But I think the sector, the affordable private school sector, is quite underrepresented in education policy and planning guidance, especially from the international community. So if you look at policy guidance that's coming from UNESCO's IIEP, there isn't a lot of information on how governments can work with non-state actors. And in a survey recently conducted by the Center for Global Development, for example, where they interviewed 900 government officials from over 35 countries, and they asked about advice that government officials are receiving on a variety of topics, and officials stated that they got the least amount of advice on private schools. So overall, I think, one, we need to look at kind of the role of the government in ensuring an equitable and quality education system. And that means we need to bring the non-state into the conversation. And two, how do we then harness the system in a better way to provide equity and quality?
Thank you, Kavita. Lanre, what are your thoughts on this question as well?
Yeah, Kavita said a lot. What I'm going to do is kind of, bring it to the local level of how what she has said really happens on ground. So in Lagos, for instance, Lagos, Nigeria, a few years ago, before the FCDO funded a project called Deepen, Developing Effective Private Education in Nigeria, the Lagos State Ministry of Education only had on their register about 5,000 plus private schools until a formal census was funded. And, they decided to count all the schools that existed in the state. So what they did was they got evaluators, enumerators that followed children that were wearing uniforms and just followed them to school. And based on that census, we realized that there were over 16,000 private schools in Lagos State. And right now it's projected to be over 20,000 private schools in Lagos State. So prior to then, a lot of the data, sometimes we hear that Nigeria has a lot of out-of-school children. We do recognize that we do have that. However, what we also see is that because the data, where we collect the data from, or what is represented by the ministry, sometimes is not inclusive of all of the schools. We sometimes leave out some of the children that are actually attending these low-fee private schools in our data. So it's important for us to kind of gather data, like Kavita mentioned, household expenditure, all the schools that exist, whether they're registered or not, just for us to be able to know the number of schools that exist and the children that attend the schools. It's important for us to be able to do that so that when we're planning, we're actually planning for them and we're working to ensure that they're providing quality education. A lot of the international NGOs, the big corporates are not working in that space because, like we said, not a lot of them understand the low-fee private school sector. And so education is required, and a lot of different sources of data, like we've mentioned, it's important. And I'd like to stop there. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Kavita and Lanre. I think one of both submissions, one thing that stands out is governments needing to be more accountable for all learners wherever they are, beyond just collecting the statistics. I would like to shift a little bit and invite Moses and Stephen. Stephen, I just saw you just joined us. When you get the floor to contribute, I'd ask you to just briefly introduce yourself before you answer the question. But just a follow-up question. We understand that non-state is left out of the conversation. and whether it's willful or is lack of, awareness by a lot of the education stakeholders, be they government, NGOs. I want us to focus a little bit on, what we could do about it. And if you could share with us, how can we use evidence and collaboration to bring the voices of low-fee private schools from the margins, where we usually are seeing them, to the center of this education discourse? If you could share us any ideas that you have, how we can use evidence and collaboration to bring these conversation of low-fee private schools in the margins into the center, or the issues of low-fee private schools into the center of the education discourse. Moses, you want to start us off?
Thank you. To bring the non-state actors to the education stage will require to make sure that education discourse is taken care of, and we rectify the evidence-based approaches and collaborative efforts that are really required to make sure that we bring other actors in the education space, especially in the low fee or in the low-cost private schools. Simply because, as my other panelists have said, we lack data that actually is tangible, and it is sometimes deliberate by the government not to give out the data or not to map the schools or the low-cost private schools in a manner that actually they want to get the exact data. So we need evidence that will also give us a way to create awareness to the government, the stakeholders, to the NGOs, and also to the investors and all the people who are involved in the interventions, in education, and also to mobilize the education financing to cater for the low fee or the low cost schools, as it is in Kenya, the APBET schools. So, and this can only be done when we put our voice together. Governments are different across Africa or across the world. When I stand alone as the UASA Kenya, or you stand alone as IDP Foundation, in the low-cost private schools in Kenya, you might be different. So what we need to do, we need to have a collaborative approach. Like we form a sort of a consortium, that actually will approach issues of the low-fee private schools and target the children more than even targeting the specific institutions, right? Because when you mention about the children in terms of the policies across the ministries and the education ministry in some governments, the mention of a child is more received than mentioning of a particular institution. So we change the approach of actually how we shall be directing our interventions to the learners in the low-fee private schools. I think I can rest there if we can maybe ask him to continue.
Thank you, Moses. Stephen, a brief introduction and then contribute to the conversation.
Thank you very much. My name is Stephen Konde and I work for World Education. I'm currently in Nkoko, so I'm speaking to you. I'm joining the meeting from Nkoko in the eastern region of Ghana. Thank you very much for the opportunity and the question, Stephen. Yes, my other colleagues have already enumerated some of the issues or what we need to do. But here in Ghana, I think what we should try to do is bring on board the National Associations of Private Schools, the Ministry of Education, and Department of Social Welfare, because I've realized that the preschool level, at the preschool level, social welfare is involved in handling or registration of these the schools who handle the preschool learners in the low-cost private schools. Now, what we need to do, honestly, in Ghana is a strong collaboration and partnership between the various actors who are leading the crusade in ensuring that the low-school private schools receive the needed support so that they are not just included in the data as we are talking about, but they get the needed support from government to be able to work effectively. And that collaboration from our point of view, and having interacted with the proprietors and at the ministry level, you realize that it is not that strong. It is that strong collaboration that when we are able to bring together to form a strong team, we will be able to get support from government, get support from the donor community to effectively run and manage the affairs of low-cost private schools. But as it stands, that type of collaboration, partnership, and effective monitoring is not there. The Ministry of Education have different agencies that are doing monitoring, but it has not been collaborated effectively. And somebody is like a form of competition within the agencies. But if you will have a team, a working group team that comes together to work and speak with one voice, I believe it will help us to achieve the results that we seek to achieve in future. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Stephen, as well. And I think I hear you loud and clear. If we stand alone, we can go only as far as our strength can take us. What we need to do is build collective power. What we need to do is come together and become a stronger voice and be more coordinated. Thank you so much. Stephen, I'll draw you in again, you and Lanre, to answer this particular question, follow-up question. And this is about localization. The conversation about localization and trust-based philanthropy is gaining a lot of steam in recent years. And there is a lot of emphasis on empowering local actors. And this empowerment of local actors for us as IDP sits at the core of our partnership strategy. But what does localization or empowering local organizations mean to you? I know, Lanre, you are in Lagos, Nigeria, and Stephen, you are here in Ghana. What does localization mean to you and your organization? And what ways do you think funders and education stakeholders can learn from local actors? How can we be applied? How can these be applied in the local sense? In local terms, what does localization and supporting local partners mean to you?
So for me and for World Education, the organization I represent, localization means getting involved, bringing the local people at grassroots level on board in either when we are seeking to do a new business development with respect to what affect them. You bring on board, seek their opinions through focus group discussions, through key information seeking, and speaking to chiefs, assemblymen, proprietors, and parents who are the direct beneficiaries of low-cost private schools in the system. Now, I have also realized that you need to get the microfinancial institutions, because most of the private schools, the low-cost private schools, are actually struggling in this area, that they are not able to raise the needed resources to effectively run their schools. Now, if you look at the Arts of Schools project in Ghana, that started several years ago, and in 2013, government of Ghana came on board. We realized that just 2 years ago or a year ago, the Education Art Fund project came, and they have brought on board social investors to be able to support partners and NGOs who are working in this field. It is my humble opinion that if we are able to bring on board the social investors to be able to provide literacy, financial literacy for the proprietors of low-cost private schools, it will help a lot. Another issue, as I've already mentioned, is ensuring that we have a technical working group. That technical working group too will be able to speak and support, be able to build the capacity of the owners of these schools, support them with teaching and learning resources and what they need at the grassroots level, so that they will be part of the management of the schools. I haven't gone around to most of the schools. You realize that the owners of these private schools are just running it without the direct involvement of parents and other stakeholders within the communities. And I believe that when there is a technical working group collaborating and monitoring the processes, linking with financial institutions, giving financial literacy to the owners, they will be able to stand on their feet and provide the needed support and the needed training resources for their schools, and so that they too would be able to provide better teaching and learning environment for their children who attend their schools. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Lanre.
Yes, okay. So I would say Ghana and Nigeria are similar, but for us at Seed Care and Support Foundation, localization means allowing the local actors to be at the center of solving local problems. So Seed, I mentioned, was a project before it became a full-fledged nonprofit organization. And our project started because the Deepen project I mentioned earlier, funded by FCDO, was using an approach that presented our local problems to local actors. And we were asked to develop a solution, and that was how Seed came into existence. And today, Deepen is gone, but Seed is still in Nigeria, and we're in Lagos, and we're working to solve our local problems. So for us, it means that empowering local players to be at the forefront of the processes designed to resolve issues affecting us locally. We are the ones on the ground, we understand local issues and the context better. And so we believe that because we're closer to the people, the schools, the parents, and other education actors, our local knowledge is valuable, and the insight we provide for funders, for education stakeholders, is something that they can really learn from. So in the practical sense, there's the need for, international actors, funders, to work with local actors to be able to localize solutions or to bring solutions in ways that can be easily adopted in country. And that's what we believe that should be done. So in any space that we're looking at, we believe that working with local actors would ensure that we reach the grassroots better. Thank you.
Thank you, Lanre and Stephen, for this insightful sharings you came to us. This is quite valuable. Want to move the conversation towards the financing and regulation of this sector. And just before I jump into my set of questions, just to share a little bit of context and information. So we know that there is insufficient financing, and also ineffective regulation could exacerbate the issues facing the affordable non-state sector. We know that the lack of funding to education in low-income countries means that pupil-teacher ratios in public schools can extend beyond 50, resulting in more parents choosing to pay to send their children to low-fee private schools where classroom sizes may be low. We know that in Ghana, the affordable non-state sector is projected to cover nearly 30% of all enrollment by 2025. And in low-cost private schools, we know that in Kenya, they are reaching almost close to 6 to 10 million students, and most of them being served in low-income urban and semi-urban areas. Yet, we know very well, again, that the collective voices of proprietors, teachers, parents, pupils of these schools always are languishing at the sidelines of education systems, when we know very well that education system change does not acknowledge these schools. Policies as well do not, and a lot of the time, if there's any regulation, they tend to be much more punitive. And so this doesn't translate to positive change on the ground. I would draw in again, Kavita, if you could share some of your experiences with us. And basically, my question is that if we look at our experience as IDP, working with local partners in Ghana and Kenya, it has taught us that regulation often miss the mark and lead to policies not being implemented well, and even some regulation being punitive, and even though they are well-intentioned. For example, we have a new teacher standard that is being implemented in Ghana, which, even though well-intended, is creating problems for recruiting as well as maintaining teachers. I want you to share with us some of your experiences. How can we create public-private partnerships that could influence policy change in the way that benefits all learners? Kavita, you want to start with us? And then Stephen, you can contribute to this.
Thanks, Stephen. I think a couple of things. I'm in India, right? So nearly 40 to 45% of all children being educated in India are going to non-state schools. But if you look at regulation, Then there was a study done by the Central Square Foundation a couple of years ago, but essentially to register and get a license for a private school in Delhi, you have to provide 125 documents and go through 155 steps, right? So regulation currently is very administrative. It's not necessarily focused on better learning outcomes. It's not proportionate. It's not transparent to parents, teachers, schools. And I think it's really important for regulation to focus less on administration and much more on the education processes and results. And I think this is where public-private partnerships can be a little bit more effective. So there's a piece of work that we're doing at GSF around building evidence on how public-private partnerships can lead to better learning outcomes and better access and equity for all learners. There's a couple of things. I think the definition of public-private partnerships is expanding. It's moving past, what was originally school management systems or vouchers. And while those are still important, I think what we are really looking at is what are the specific gaps that non-state actors can fill in the system, right? What are innovations that are happening within non-state that can be embedded within government systems? How do partnerships really build better sustainability and financial viability for the non-state sector as a whole? So I think that's really where the sector needs to move towards, and that's where governments and non-state actors can work a little bit more closely. But also, I think, and this is some work that we're doing with IDP Foundation as well at GSF, but really to say, it really now needs to be an all hands on deck approach, right? Private schools, private actors, governments are all equally responsible for delivering education. And so one of the examples that we looked at in this piece of work that we're doing is, for example, RELI, which is a coalition working across Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda. But they're really looking at what kind of data and evidence can we generate that will then support governments in delivering education quality. And RELI is a coalition of 70-odd organizations working in those countries. So I think there is a few ways for non-state actors to really represent the voice of the thousands of independent private schools that are operating within the country. But it really comes down to what kind of data are we generating? How is that evidence then embedded within the policy process of a government? And how do we then make sure it's embedded long-term?
Thank you, Kavita. Stephen, any thoughts on this? How can public-private partnerships influence policy change in a way that benefits all learners?
Yeah, exactly. So thank you for the question. In Ghana, fortunately for us, IDP Foundation has done a lot of research work in this area that is available. So we need to show proof that we have done research work, and this is what the research is pointing at to submit to government. And you and I, Stephen, and the Ghanaians who are on this call know that in Ghana, the political leadership would only pay attention to us, give us an open door policy when it is time for them to do their campaigning for political power. So I suggest that put all the research findings that we have together. When this door is open and they are putting their manifesto together, we present it to them that this is what is lacking in the low-cost private schools. For example, we can make a case as well that there are several schools in Ghana where government does not have schools. There are no government schools there. Why don't you make a case that, look, post-national service personnel, now the teachers from the colleges of education, they do national service. We can make a case, let's post teachers there because they don't have schools. And the only schools available are the low-cost private schools. So we'll make a case for government to post schools into this so that they can have teachers who have been trained and not only depending on teachers who have completed the primary school, JSS and others. We can also look at, I already spoken about that, the system that is put in place to monitor and regulate. I can tell you for a fact that if you go to some of the schools, they are registered with the Ghana Education Service, some with social welfare, some with the Ghana National Association of Private Schools. So there is no single center that this data is collated. We need to look at that, bringing that on board to have a center where we can have all these schools map up and then put in a database, and we know where they are. So that the technical working group that had already suggested, that will be able to help us, so that when we speak as a unit, when we speak with one voice, when we continue to advocate, government and policymakers will listen and then would do what we ask for. Here again, let me give the example of the out-of-school project, which started, and then now government has put up a Ghana Complementary Education Agency as a result of the advocacy that started with the technical working group. So I believe that with a similar thing for the low-cost private schools made up of all the actors, and with IDP and other people presenting the data that they have to government and the leadership, the sector minister and other people, it will give us one voice and they would listen to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Kavita and Stephen, for these points. We want to briefly focus on finance. And I think is a very important part of areas of focus for this conversation, and an area that we need to work further on. We know that governments, both in low and lower middle income countries, struggle to fulfill education financing within their countries, despite, they meet all the benchmarks when it comes to budget allocation to education. And so we need to attract more financing, not from one source, but from a lot more sources. Lanre and Moses, it would be great to get your thoughts on this. In what ways do you think the affordable non-state sector could play in galvanizing funding and expanding access to education? Lanre.
Okay, all right. So like I've done earlier, I'm going to, contextualize for Nigeria. Even though some states in Nigeria are moving closer to the benchmarks for budget allocation, generally in Nigeria, we do not meet the benchmark for budget allocation for education. And just like many low and lower middle income countries, we constantly struggle to fulfill our education financing needs at all levels. And even the financing that is provided, we're not really very accountable as to how, the funds are being spent and how it's, leading to better learning outcomes for our children. The non-state sector can actually expand access to quality education for children in Nigeria, especially as I mentioned, we have high numbers of out-of-school children, which currently stands at about 20 million. And we also believe that the sector can also play a role in galvanizing education funding through innovating financing models. We talk about grants and subsidies, but at SEED, we've currently been advocating for a model for Lagos State, for instance, where we believe that an innovative financing model can be used to create an education trust fund, which can help to support the low-fee private schools. I know that the place of a microfinance institution is there, the place for the commercial sector, but we need an intervention. Remember, I mentioned that in Lagos State, we have a huge number of private schools, especially low-fee private schools. Specifically, we have just about 1,700 public schools and over 20,000 private schools, of which more than 60 to 70% of them are low-fee private schools. So the huge education financing need is there, and we believe that to be able to meet those needs, we need something really innovative, and the education trust fund structure, which is some form of an innovative financing, can help to meet the needs of the low-fee private school sector. Thank you.
Lanre. Moses, what are your thoughts?
Thank you so much. Allow me to go back to the first two questions, localization. Localization should involve genuine partnership with the local actors. They should value their expertise. Even if, like in the scenario of Kenya, some of the proprietors of the low-cost private schools might not have had the education training as their foundational training, but by virtue of having a vision to establish an institution, it should be tapped as an expertise approach in solving the gap in the education space. So there should be practical applications that include co-designing education programs with local communities and also involving local education actors, especially the non-state education actors. On influencing policy and change through the PPP, I want to say this. The public-private partnership should focus on evidence-based policy making. And they should mutually be beneficial regulations that actually enhance the quality and the accessibility of education for all learners in the informal settlements. Now, coming back to the funding, as you said, well, not all governments or countries meet their education budgets or needs. So they should therefore appreciate the fact of non-state education actors. And then tap that as a low-hanging fruit that will support the government to source funds to fill the gaps. So then it should attract more financing into the education space through involving the non-state actors, because they will give the thematic areas of interventions that actually are lacking in their spaces as education providers. Then lastly, on the same, we need to recognize the potential role of the non-state sector, especially the low-fee private schools, because they complement public efforts by offering affordable education solutions to the government. So all the investors in the education space, philanthropists, governments, they should support the non-state education actors through giving them subsidies, grants, or innovative financing mechanisms. As I earlier responded in my other template, thereby, expanding access to quality education. Having said
Thank you very much. Yeah, Moses.
Yes.
I think these are very great points. And I will ask that probably we move forward from there.
Sure.
I think we are gradually getting to the hour mark, and it's been a very insightful conversation. A lot of detailed insights and a lot of learnings over there from various constituencies, and I think that we've had a very interesting conversation about the need to raise our collective voice, the need for us to come together as the affordable non-state sector to be able to drive our voice and ensure that what we have to offer is being listened to by our policymakers. And so the collective voice, collective position, collective power being built is very, very important. I think there's enough points being made about the need to work with local partners, they are on the front lines, they know best the problems, and they have the capacities to advance, the remedies to the problem. So localization means really trusting local partners to deliver the work and supporting them on that. We've also addressed the evidence gaps, and we know how this is also translating to the policy deficiencies that we face in the sector, and also talked a lot about the financing gaps that we face within the non-state space and education as a whole, and also the ineffectiveness of regulation and the need for us to work to strengthen regulation, to support government, ministries of education, their agencies, to make regulation much more responsive, more supportive, to ensure that the non-state education sector is really playing this complementary role. I have a final question to my panel. However, I would always prioritize the questions from our audiences. And so if there are any questions that my support team could present to me, or any of the panelists are tagged in, I would like to relay this to the panelists so that they also answer some of these questions. Okay, I have a question here from so I have a question here, and this is a question that is open to any of the panelists. In just a minute, quick response. How are children who face barriers, such as socioeconomic obstacles, supported by IDP Foundation and other affordable non-state, the affordable non-state sector actors? I think this is a very specific question. On the IDP side, I can provide some insight, but maybe I will call in Lanre if you want to share a little bit. How are children who face barriers such as socioeconomic obstacles supported by organizations such as yours? And I'll also share a little bit around IDP Foundation.
Oh, okay. So I was raising my hand to Nana's question to be able to answer that, because part of our work provides direct support around her question. So I don't know if I can pivot from your question to her question.
Sure, and I can respond to that. So please go ahead.
So I'll let IDP attend to the question you posed. For Nana, she's asking, she said, I think Les talked about part of financing structure for low-cost private school is empowering the schools through innovative models to improve fee collection rates. She would love to hear the thoughts on school fee collection in low-cost private schools. So part of the work we do with our schools, we have a framework that we train our schools on, and one of the key things we do with them is for the low-fee private schools to understand their schools as businesses. And typically as businesses, school fees is revenue and it's income, and their school fees collection rate is their main source of revenue. And so one of the key things we see with our 700 schools is very low school fee collection rates. And the first thing is being able to even calculate and know that they are low on their collection rates. A lot of school owners do not even know their percentage. So the first thing is being aware about the school fee collection rates. The second thing is to be able to come up with different models to be able to collect these school fees. So do you want to do daily school fees collection? Provide the parents with options of daily school fees collection or weekly school fees collection. And that is linked to something we encourage our schools to do. It is for them to understand who are our parents. Do our parents daily fee workers that earn money on a daily basis so they can easily pay school fees on a daily basis? Or are our parents, small business owners, and they only earn at a certain rate? So an understanding of who our parents are is a critical part of school fees collection to be able to, assign different strategies to be able to collect school fees. There are more that we share, but that's one critical part that we've seen as a way to empower the schools to be able to collect their school fees effectively, because it's a real issue.
Thank you, Lanre. And to the question around what's intervention like for learners with socio-economic obstacles. I think for IDP, we work through partnerships, and to specifically answer your question, working through partnership means, for example, for us, getting affordable financing to schools to run and serve communities that are low income is directly how we address helping children with economic challenges to gain access to education. So we work through our financial partners, we work through our quality partners and all that. We are able to provide financing to these financial partners who onward lend in a way that the schools can afford credit to be able to run their schools, keep fees at a level that is able and it's affordable to communities where such a child with economic obstacles is facing. And so that child is able to still access school, even though he is in a very low or poor community, even though he's coming from a poor household. So we are supporting already frontline responders, schools that are already open and serving communities, helping them getting financing to expand the work that they're already doing. And that is how we respond to such a particular situation. I think we are grinding very slowly to the final end of this conversation. Sorry, we couldn't address all your questions. However, I would like to give 30 seconds for all our panel members, just a closing statement in less than 30 seconds, sorry. So we start with Kavita and we go to Stephen, Moses, and then Lanre.
Yeah, I think it is really about better coordination and more sustainability. So how do we ensure that the non-state sector is fully embedded within the education system? I don't think we can look at government versus non-state as two kind of competing priorities. If quality is the final outcome, better access, better equity is the final outcome for all learners, then both these systems really need to work much closer together.
Stephen, 30 seconds.
So let me use my listen to address the question of who leads the process of collaboration. I think this is the beginning of the process, and IDP Foundation can start with that to get on board other COCs in this area to be able to form the technical working group and lead the process of coordinating all that we have discussed here. I also want to comment on the issue of fee collection. I think one of the things I kept telling the proprietors when I was going around was that you are a prominent person in the community and you are running the school. People know you, so they bring their awards. They don't want to pay fees. You can't sack people, their children, their awards from school. And one of the things they need is the management skills. They can get people to manage and be able to effectively collect schools from them when the owners or the establishment owners are not themselves living the process. Because as a prominent Alaji or Ajia in the community, people will certainly take advantage of you because they know that you cannot ask their awards to go home. So one of the areas I think can also help in collecting fees is to get people with the skills to manage the school for them so that they will stay back and then give a directive as to what should be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Moses, and then Lanre. Closing statements, less than 30 seconds.
Okay. Let's voice for policy alignment in the non-state actors. Let's mobilize resources to support data and research and capacity building. And let us also champion for recognizing and actively mapping for the low-fee private schools, and let the NGOs, the interveners with their programs target the very needy non-state actors in the education space. Thank you.
Thank you, Lanre.
So I'd like to round up by saying our children are only children once, We need to ensure that they have access to quality education, and every single stakeholder needs to work together to be able to achieve the Sustainable Development Goal 4. So whether state, non-state government, the funders, the NGOs, everyone needs to come on board to be able to ensure that we provide quality education for the children. I believe that as the private sector, we should lead. We should go out there and put our voice there, because currently most governments in low to middle income countries are not doing what they're supposed to do. So we need to go out there and advocate and ensure that we're able to ensure that every child has access to quality education. Thank you.
At this stage, I'll take the opportunity to thank my distinguished panelists for spending the time by sharing a lot of valuable insights with us. I would extend this to our attendees who stayed with us. Apologies for exceeding by, as my count is heading to the second minute. Thank you for your time. This is the beginning of many of such local conversations that we want to have coming together as a collective voice of education stakeholders to really advance the cause of the affordable non-state sector and ensure that they are part of the education discourse planning, and as well as are well positioned to be able to contribute fully to the education outcomes in the national contexts wherever they find themselves. So thank you very much. I'd like to say that this recorded session will be available on YouTube, so do well to check on it. I know that there were myriads of questions we couldn't go through. Please still send your questions to us at info@idpfoundation.org, and we'll do well to respond to them in due course. Thank you very much, and sorry again for exceeding over 2 minutes. It was a great conversation. I learned a lot, and we'll keep on talking together. Thank you.